Great, so yeah, come in and sit anywhere. Chairs or cushions is fine. Really not too bad at the front. I'm just wondering, it might be worth, are there any spare mats in the corner? Maybe just put a couple of mats and some cushions over there, because I think we usually have one or two later people and it'd be easier to make space for them now. Are we live online yet? Hi, everybody. Great, so we're just settling in the shrine. Yeah, very warm welcome. My name is Kusala Sara, and I know some of you are here for the first time, so particularly warm welcome to you. We're going to be starting with some meditation, as Pranyaman has said. So what we're going to do is, come in, fine. I'll lead us in a short meditation. It's really nice just to spend a bit of time arriving, like our psyches are probably all over different parts of London, and so we can sort of gather ourselves, arrive, and then I'll talk a little bit more. I shouldn't say all over different parts of London, because we've got a whole audience across the globe who are tuning in online, so not just London, but everywhere. Anyway, so we can gather ourselves, become present, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the practice that we're going to do and how to work in the practice, and then we'll do a longer meditation. So, in summary, a short arriving meditation and then a longer meditation, and the practice is going to be around the mindfulness of breathing. And just to say, we do have a whole online audience. And many of them have been coming over the last 2 years during lockdown and beyond. The camera's on me and not you guys in the audience. I might see some backs of heads, but that's really it. So welcome for those of you who are in your kitchen, in your living room, etc. Really nice to have you here as well. Great, so we're going to start by making a salutation at the shrine. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Dharmaya. Namo Dharmaya. Namo Sanghaya. Namo Sanghaya. Namo Namah. Namo Namah. Om. Is anyone here new to meditation? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so the main thing is to find an upright and comfortable posture where you're not putting any strain on your knees or your ankles, and a way to rest your hands on your lap, maybe resting something on your lap so that your hands can be supported. So really, we're going to be doing the mindfulness of breathing, and just all of the shuffling around and preparing for the practice, that can be the start of your mindfulness practice. So finding the right cushion, shuffling around on your seat, you're starting to notice your body. You're starting to just heighten your awareness of your actions. Starting perhaps to be a little bit more deliberate in the movements that you make. So I'm just going to talk us into a settling, arriving sort of meditation. Just perhaps softening your gaze or closing your eyes. And just noticing what's obvious to you now. Maybe you're aware of your thoughts. Maybe you're aware of the atmosphere in the room, other people. Just seeing what's apparent, what's making itself known to you. Letting that change as you sit. Feeling the shape of your body, the position of your body. All the different aspects of our experience, all the different bits of information the body's giving you. You're just checking if you're holding any tension in your body that you can quite easily let go of. Just can you check in with your shoulders? Can they release a bit more? Just let them fall away from your ears. Can you feel the weight of your body settling down into your seat? You don't really need to try to do that. Can you just allow it to happen more and more? Just check if you're holding any tension in your belly. Can you soften the belly? If there's tightness in the chest, can you let the chest expand? Maybe a few deeper breaths. The jaw, the muscles in your face, just allow them to soften. Feeling into your hands, fingers, letting them be relaxed, naturally curving. The sensitivity of your hands and fingers. Letting the awareness move through your body, just touching in on direct sensation, feet, legs, arms, your trunk, your ribs, your belly, your heart. Sounds around you. few more moments. Before we come out of this meditation. So we're going to do the mindfulness of breathing in a minute, which might not mean very much to some of you, but I won't be able to explain it in a very in-depth way, but I'll give you some pointers for the practice if you're new to it. Let's give a bit more light maybe. And what I want to say about the mindfulness of breathing is, I think it's a sort of basic reminder that this is a very direct meditation, and when we're meditating, we're encountering our minds. So very often when we start to meditate, we come along because we're a little bit fed up with the way our minds are going. That there's something driving us that feels a little bit out of control, that we want to have a bit more of a say about our state of mind. Certainly that's part of the reason why I meditate. It might be to do with anxiety. It's just like anxiety or some other emotion seems to be getting the better of us, and we hear that meditation is a way out of that, and it can be. But there's a sort of experience that many of us have with meditation, is that there's the ideal of this sort of really calm experience that maybe is like a sort of I always think of it as the opening credits of The Simpsons, when there's blue sky and a few like white fluffy clouds, or there's this ideal state of mind, and then there's the habits of our mind very, very forcefully and making themselves known, and they're making themselves known because we can't when we're in meditation, we're doing the most simple act that we can. I always think of meditation as a renunciation. We're for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, we're saying to ourselves, I'm not going to do anything other than sit here, which means that I'm not going to turn to my usual distractions. I'm not going to follow other impulses. So it's a flavour of letting go, just for a boundaried amount of time, letting go of those actions. And those actions are what sort of stop us from noticing what our minds are doing, because we act so quickly. So, I have a little slightly uncomfortable feeling and I'm not going to investigate it, I'm just going to see what's happening on my Instagram post and how many heart things I've got on that, or whatever. Whatever is nearest to hand or habitually turn to. So this is all we sort of know this. But I just sort of want to say some encouraging words about that. So sometimes when we sit to meditate, there's an immediate effect. We sit on our cushion and the magic of the shrine room or the seat sort of just really takes us out of our habitual states of mind. But very, very often we're just encountering our mind in all its force, all its frustrated force, all its frustrated craving. So what do we do? How do we contend with that? It's really sort of hard to learn how to have the right attitude to that state of mind. So I just sort of want to say something about that it's brave what we're doing sitting in meditation. You might encounter things that make you uncomfortable. You know, like I was thinking, I said something the other day. I didn't really even mean it. It was just a really cynical thing to say. It just sort of came out of my mouth. And then later, I sort of noticed the flavour of that. And then sitting in meditation is sort of more acute. So you sort of your actions are reflected and amplified a little bit. We feel them. So how brave we need to be to sort of come into relation to that, and that the attitude that needs to happen is a very, very patient one, very curious about it, and a very sensitive one. So, for instance, how do I want to say this? The way we feel, like the cynical thing that I said the other day, the way I feel that is, you know, it's not just a thought like, oh no, I wish I hadn't done that. There's a body response as well. And if I don't want to do things like that again, I need to feel the negative impact on myself. So I need to allow myself to feel it. But in order to allow myself to feel that, I need a sort of patience. I need to not really make it very personal. So not sort of go into a story about, oh golly, what are you like? I don't know, like everyone's going to think you're a total rotter, or you know, like, and then sort of letting those kinds of thoughts snowball into a big sort of condemnation of my personality. So I need to not do that, but I also need to take it seriously that I don't want to say things like that anymore. So sort of need to just bear with it without adding more to the story. And it's like that with any experience, you know, positive ones as well. Just bear with it, feel what it's like, and don't see what you're adding, and try not to add anything more. Because once you add more, then it goes off in a direction that you might not want it to. If you don't add more, you can just stay with the experience, and the experience will. This is the magic of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a transformative act, so you don't need to change things, it changes of its own accord. So I just want to sort of say, take heart, be brave, be patient, and sort of develop as much sensitivity, be as sensitive as you can, and sort of in relation to your mind. So we'll do that in the mindfulness of breathing, which is a 4-stage practice. It's very, very quick to explain the 4 stages for those of you who haven't done it before. In the first stage, after each out-breath, you count to 10. So after each out-breath, you count, and you do that up to 10, and then you start again. So breathe in, breathe out, 1. Breathe in, breathe out, 2. And you're using the counting as a framework. In the second stage, you do that before the in-breath. So you're just slightly changing the counting. And it's good to remember why we do this. So for those of you who are more familiar with the practice, the counting helps the mind go from busy, thinking, problem-solving mode to it's like a gradated way down into a deeper experience. The third stage, we drop the counting, And then in the fourth stage of the mindfulness of breathing, you're choosing the most subtle area that you can feel the breath, so maybe round the nose, round the top lip, and just letting the attention stay there. Okay, and if that's confusing, all you do, just turn to the breath and follow the sensations of the breath. That's the main point of the practice. So we'll give that a go. Meditating for about half an hour. So if you were uncomfortable in that last practice, admit it to yourself and do what you can to support more comfort, more stability, more stillness in the posture, which means you can get some more cushions. There are blankets as well. Does anyone need any help setting up a posture? We've been following the theme of the four reminders. So in the second half, Akashamitra is going to talk about karma, which is one of the reminders. So I'm going to read a traditional formulation, sort of poetic formulation of the four reminders. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, you'll soon catch up. But I'll read this poem, sort of poem verse from Tsongkhapa, this Tibetan teacher, as we settle. This human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken, but this body is impermanent. Ready or not, one day I shall die. So this life I must know as the tiny splash of a raindrop, a thing of beauty that disappears even as it comes into being. The karma I create shapes the course of my life, but however I act, life always has difficulties. No one can control it all. Only the Dharma can free me and others from suffering forever. Therefore, I recall my heart's longing for freedom and resolve to make use of every day and night to realize it. The mindfulness of breathing. Okay, great. So we will have a tea break now. Those of you who are online, Pranamanis is going to come and chat to you while you have your tea break, and he has it in here, and the rest of us can go through into the mural room.
Okay, so hello to those of you online and those of you who are staying in here. There's 36 people in the ether and about 6 in the room. And the new style is you get regaled by a different order member while you have your tea. So, there's 39 of you now. That's good. You've arrived for the best bit. So I'm just going to see who's here that I might know. Lots of names I don't. Looks like we've got at least a few tuning in from India. So if you haven't already, do put into the chat where you're tuning in from. I'd be interested to know what kind of a spread we've got. We've got Nina in Thamesmead. Oh, and Aryanaga in Mayo. How nice to see you, Aryanaga. You guys can see me, of course. I can't see you. But I can see your names, or at least your handles. Murray in Walthamstow. Nice to see you, Murray. Cedric in Norfolk. Hello from Edinburgh, that's Eve, so we're doing pretty well for the island. Someone called Light in East London, good name. And yes, someone called Nadia is asking, is there somewhere to learn the practice? I think that Mircea, who's your online host tonight, who you also can't see, is going to post a link, or he has done already. Anyway, there's a thumbs up from the corner of the room. So the Mindfulness of Breathing and the Metta Bhavana, we've got short videos on our YouTube channel, even if a link doesn't arrive. If you go to our YouTube channel, which of course we're keen for you to subscribe to if you don't already, you can find little videos teaching the practices. And then there are also videos just with bells that you can bookmark for yourself so you can do at home, I think in some varied lengths. And just in case you don't find what you need there, I'm just trying to remember the URL. There's another resource that's really important. We call it the Buddhist Center.com. It might be, the URL might be the Buddhist Center online. Mitch is going to post it. That will have online meditations. And then there's a third thing called Free Buddhist Audio, which is definitely freebuddhistaudio.com. So between those 3 sites, you'll get led meditations of lots of different lengths, body scans, everything you need. Oh my goodness, someone's in Greenland. Khadija. Hello, Khadija. Thanks very much. Kiss us on. Paul in South Sea. In Paris from London, that's someone called Paradise. Hi, Paradise. Hope you got nice weather there. Lucy in Cornwall, hello. Nice to see you. Great. So yeah, we're partly doing these classes hybrid because we want to take seriously the sort of what was for us one of the benefits, silver linings of the pandemic, if you see what I mean, which is that we started reaching a lot more people. That's probably a spread of people that can come to the centre because you live nearby, and sometimes it's just easier to tune in online, you've got something you need to be at home for, or it's people abroad who have been here once or twice and then moved, or people who've never been here and might not get the chance to be here. So this is just to say we are committed to providing you with at least some activities as well, so that won't stop completely. Like a lot of people, we had to get good quickly at reaching people digitally in the last year or two, and we do want to kind of be here for you as well. So our classes are no longer entirely just for people who can make it to the centre. I'd also say if you've only tuned in online but you can make it here, do come. Do try and make it. It's even better IRL. So hi Ari and Arga, and we've got Dave in Bognor Regis. All right. So not bad for West Country, if it's the Bognor I'm thinking of, with Lucy and Cornwall. A few other things to say in a minute, but why don't you let me know how you got on in that meditation? We'll do that first of all. So let me know how you found meditating just now, doing the mindfulness of breathing, with a few steers from Kuslasara first. And we might say a few things about that, and then I got suggestions for a couple of next steps, things you might do in the next few months if you're getting something out of our classes and interested. And do keep saying hello and where you're from as well. And Merch and I will see to you in some way. Okay. There'll be time for tea as well, don't worry. I need to go out in a few minutes. Well, perhaps I'll say how I got on in the meditation. I love meditating for the second time in the day in the evening. I don't do it as standard, but of course we do quite a few classes here, so sometimes do. And I do an hour in the morning, and then if I come to it again in the evening, it's a completely different experience somehow. In London, at least, we're in the evening. It's a chilly autumn evening. We've got the curtains shut here in the main shrine room, and you've done the business of the day and you've started the week. And I find it a curious mixture of quite a lot of settling and pockets of stronger experience that haven't been able to come out, if you see what I mean. So kind of stronger thoughts or emotions are kind of punching through a bit suddenly what's otherwise a pleasantly softening, relieving, settling experience. So in a way they can both be surprising. I think somehow being at a class and it being busy and it being the evening and it being the week, I probably don't expect to relax quite so much, which might actually be part of the key to relaxing, if you see what I mean, that you're not expecting it. Anyway, that's hard to pull off, but I did settle quite a bit. And then also kind of there are, I think, undigested items from the day or the weekend that kind of suddenly grip the consciousness. And this evening, for me at least, were passing through also quite quickly, probably because I felt relaxed and fairly peaceful and kind of, I don't know, nice warm atmosphere here. Like I say, the kind of candles are lit and there are, I don't know, maybe 45 people in the room meditating this evening, and that's quite sort of supportive, it's a nice atmosphere. So I need to just be a little bit patient with the much stronger kind of physical, emotional and thought bundles that sort of kind of belch out a bit. And remember that it's all the meditation, if you see what I mean. It's all a sort of meeting with the mind. Sometimes people say you're confronted with the mind in meditation, but that sounds a bit confrontational, which it can feel sometimes, but you're meeting your mind a little bit more deeply when you meditate. It's a little like you meet a friend when you're both in a good state and you're both ready for the meeting, if you see what I mean. You can find out more than you usually do and say a bit more. Perhaps a meditation's like that, or an evening meditation's a bit like that. We're in the mind, of course, all day, whether or not we know it, but we meet the mind a little bit more fully when we meditate. So I think what I'm describing there of my meditation this evening fits all of that. Meditation comprises all of that, if you see what I mean, including surprising things. You can be surprised how settled you get, and you can be surprised what kind of bursts out of your consciousness as well, and how quickly the state can change. Yeah. So let's see how you guys are getting on. Oh yeah, Paradise was relieved to drop the counting in the third stage. Yeah, I know what you mean there. Nina was focusing on how the breath feels and changes, and then a distraction in the form of her son knocked on the door. I'm sure you met that very well. And Shovit found that the Tsongkhapa poem really helped to reflect on the moment we were in. And Marcel also had a noisy mind today. Yeah, perhaps just something in response to Paradise's comment. The numbers, I actually personally try not to refer to counting with the mindfulness of breathing. It can get a bit pedantic, but I always try to say marking breaths with a number, because even counting has more of an idea of sequence in it and where you want to get to. Actually, the numbers are really just something that's easy to go through and easy to know whether you've gone off course. But that's probably by the by. And I do know what you mean, that when we take the stabilisers off, as it's sometimes known, and drop the numbers in the third stage, can be a bit more like a kind of a breeze, it's sort of a bit more unlabelled, like a breeze, and that can be nice and clear and free and easy. Others find it destabilising, of course. But part of the sort of vision of those first two stages is that the first one, with a number at the end of the out-breath, has a settling effect because it emphasises the out-breath. And placing the number at the beginning of the in-breath in the second stage has a stimulating effect because it emphasises the in-breath. And of course, without us necessarily knowing, they both get us to attend quite a lot more to a subtler level of our experience by looking for the end or beginning of the breath as applicable, if that makes sense. If you just go into that challenge, sometimes without noticing, your mind becomes more soft and subtle because it's got to, in order to be sensitive to such a sort of fleeting, subtle experience. It's a bit like if you're listening for a very faint sound. So if a sound's very, very faint, but I really want to hear it, to know what it is, my mind, and even in a sense my body, have got to become a bit more subtle to make sure I catch it. So hopefully the first two stages all have that effect, but one of the ideas is that the first stage calms you down, and then from that place of calm you also stimulate yourself, but again with a subtle object. So it's not the stimulation of busyness and people and gadgets and so on, it's the stimulation of a hopefully somewhat rested mind. So that's something about the mindfulness of breathing. There's something else I was going to add about that. What's that? Oh, I know. Shovit mentioned the Tsongkhapa text. I'm just going to read that once more, because it's quite strong and a little bit magical, and once might not be enough. So I'll just read that and then got one or two other things to mention. Okay. And this is actually the kind of text that some people read to themselves or recite before meditating every day. For some months, I went through this in my mind as I sat down for meditation because it had quite an effect on me. So it goes. This human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. But this body is impermanent. Ready or not, one day I shall die. So this life I must know as the tiny splash of a raindrop, a thing of beauty that disappears even as it comes into being. The karma I create shapes the course of my life. But no matter how I act, life always has difficulties. No one can control it all. Only the Dharma can free me and others from suffering forever. Therefore I recall my heart's longing for freedom and resolve to make use of every day and night to realise it. Okay, that's a little bit recapping the first half, and now I've got two other things to say, and then I'll just pop out for a minute and you can have a few minutes to get your teas, go to the loo, whatever. The second half will restart in about, 8 or 9 minutes. But yeah, one thing I wanted to say, speaking of precious opportunities, was something about our winter retreat this year. So the one thing I'd really, really encourage you to do, if you're getting a bit more involved in Buddhism and meditation, and it's remotely possible for you to get there, is to come on our winter retreat this year. So that's for the last 10 days of December at a place called Attaining in Herefordshire. And it would be good for anybody in their first couple of years of practice, whether or not you've been on a retreat before, even if this evening is your very first contact with meditation and Buddhism, you're completely welcome on that retreat. It is for you. And what do we do on the retreat? It's a bit like a class in terms of the shared atmosphere, the teachings, looking at the mind a bit more, a bit of ordinary friendliness and healthy contact with others, but also a chance to really explore a bigger vision of life than the ordinary grind of daily life, or even a classic Christmas can offer us. So Christmas and New Year may be all very well in their own way, but since I've started going on retreat at that time of year, I've hardly looked back, or I haven't looked back. I'm going to be co-leading with Subhadramati our bigger winter retreat in Herefordshire. There are actually two, so for any level of experience there is a winter retreat for the last 10 days of December. But for the one I'll be on in Herefordshire, there are also two options to go for just 5 nights. You could come for the 5 nights over Christmas, or you could come for the 5 nights that finish on New Year's Day. And the heating works really well, the food's delicious, you'll get lots of input on meditation and Buddhism, you get talks, but you'll get loads of time for walks in the countryside, having naps, meeting people, little workshops, yoga classes, and there's a team of, I think this year it might be 20 people, goes up 2 or 3 days early to warm up the whole place and prepare it for you, and spend 3 days on retreat with each other, practicing to create an environment of practice to welcome you into. So I really, really hope that you'll come. It'd be great to meet you there. And like I say, anybody tuning into this class or coming is really, really welcome on that retreat. It's for all of you. So I'm just going to interrupt this broadcast to see if everything's all right with Kuslasara. Is it time to come out?
It's time to come out. I've come to get the bell, but I didn't want to...
Okay, you come to get the bell.
interrupt your...
Okay, I'll just need 1 more minute.
Yeah.
And then, is that all right?
Yeah.
Would you like the bell? Or shall I bring it when I come? I'll bring it when I come. Okay. The other thing I wanted to say was to do with our online activities again, and the context of the pandemic, which is, of course, that we've needed to step up our activities quite a lot to try to meet the need of people who wanted mindfulness and Buddhism and meditation, but found it difficult to access. Of course, all of us found it difficult to access for 18 months or so, but maybe you're elsewhere in the world right now, or you're looking after somebody at home and you can't get here. As I was saying at the beginning, we really want to keep reaching out to you. Of course, what that's meant is quite an expansion of our operation, including kit, volunteers, time in the office, planning, thinking about it, responding to the situation, and of course all of that has cost money, and our income, is very significantly dented, I would say, in the last 18 months. So I just wanted to say that if you feel at all able to help us with a gift of money, either one-off or ongoing, it will really, really help us keep reaching out to people doing what you're doing right now, which is sitting in your kitchen or your living room or whatever, and accessing the London Buddhist Centre's activities. So we'd really, really appreciate any gift you can give, especially a regular one, a direct debit. And we're really grateful for what we already receive. So if you already give, thank you very, very much. Please keep doing so if you can. If you're thinking about it, you feel a bit of a connection, a bit of gratitude for the activities, do go with that urge to give back. We won't pocket it. We will, in some form, give it straight back to people who are exactly in your position. So hopefully Murcha has posted a link to donate if you can. Very gratefully received by us, so thank you very much. So do give if you can. Do please, most importantly, come on the winter retreat. And now we'll just have a couple of minutes to get a tea or whatever, use the loo, and then come back for Akashamitra's talk, probably 5 minutes from now. Okay, nice to see you all. Good night from me, but do stay tuned. Okay.
Yeah, so welcome back everyone. Nice to see you all. My name's Akashamitra, and I'll be leading the second half, where I'll be giving a talk. And welcome back to everyone online as well. Nice to have you all with us. We're looking at the moment, we're doing a series at the moment on what we call the Four Reminders. So just out of interest, who's been here for previous weeks of that? Okay, so quite a few of you have, yeah. So how to talk about the Four Reminders? I was thinking about this during the break, and it's kind of like the Four Reminders are sort of like really, really pithy kind of distilled Dharma. So if you were to kind of boil the Dharma down, I don't know, make a kind of freeze-dried powder out of it, that might be the Four Reminders, and I'm going to sort of attempt to pour some boiling water on one of them tonight. So tonight I'm going to be looking at karma and its consequences. But I wanted to just backtrack a little bit before I do that, and I was listening to Kuslasara's talk, and I caught up with that online, and she was talking about the preciousness of human life, and she was talking about death. That's right. Yeah. I was paid so much attention. It really. I did, and you'll see from what I'm about to say. But yeah, she was talking about death and our mortality, and that kind of sparked me off. And I thought, actually, there is a link with what I'm going to talk about tonight as well. And I just wanted to share a little memory with you, really, because after listening to Kuslasara's talk, it put me in mind of really my first kind of strong experience of death, which is I lost my father when I was 24 years old, and I'm almost double that age now. And that's become quite poignant for me recently because I'm almost at the age that he was when he died. So I'll be 48 in a couple of months, and he just turned 49 when he died. So this age of 49 has been on my mind really since he died, really, since I was quite young. And it's quite strange for me to be approaching the age that he was when he died. And it's just brought back a few memories for me, really, and listening to Kuslasara's talk really brought back those memories for me as well. And I was remembering a time when I was living in Liverpool when he died, and my family at the time was living in Berwick-upon-Tweed in the Scottish borders, and I'd been back basically when he died, and I'd been back up for his funeral and so on. And I was catching the train back to Liverpool, so I'd been back up north for a couple of weeks, and he died, and then there was the funeral and so on. And all around this time was obviously extremely sort of poignant. And I was catching the train back to Liverpool, which was where I was living at the time. And I had this experience, which was being on the train, and I was sat behind, so I kind of had this double seat, and behind me there was a woman and her 3 children. And I was listening to them for a couple of hours, and she was reading a story basically to her children for quite a long time on the train. And it really, really opened something up in me. Like I felt extremely, I just felt this kind of upwelling of sort of openness and metta, and felt a real connection with this woman. And it was something in the interaction between her and her children. It reminded me of the times when my father had sort of taken the time to be very kind to me, and the time that he'd spent with me. So particularly at that time I was thinking of, we used to do martial arts training together. So I started training in martial arts when I was 10 years old, and we used to do a lot of that kind of thing together. And that sort of interaction between the mum and her kids somehow sparked something off in me. And it made me want to behave differently. So there was something in that made me look at my own life and look at what his input had been in my life, and it made me want to do something differently. And as I got off the train, we were all getting off the train together, and I just turned to this woman and I said, look, I've been listening to you reading to your kids for the last couple of hours, and it's really, really beautiful, and it's lovely to see somebody interacting with their children like that and really taking care of them. And she sort of looked a bit kind of taken aback, and then she just broke into this smile, and it was just a really, really lovely moment between us, like a moment of appreciating something really, really just ordinary and sort of everyday. But there was something in my heart that realised that we are all going to die, and I'm going to die, and this woman's going to die, and these children are young now, but one day they'll be old, and this will mean something to them. And yeah, it was just a real moment, really. And I was kind of reflecting on that when I was thinking about talking about karma. And I was thinking, well, really what's happening there is you're seeing into the fact that things come into being and then they pass away. You know, this is a key sort of teaching of the Buddha. So it's a core aspect of his realization, is that there are processes happening in the universe and that things aren't random, and that things don't last forever, do they? They, you know, this opportunity that we have, this precious human life, is fleeting. Things come into being and they pass away, and that's not random. You know, there are certain processes at work in the universe, and we can discern actually what those are. And the Buddha was able to discern what those are. So it's like we're in the middle of this kind of web of infinite conditions, but we are also part of those conditions as well. We're not separate from that. So it's like we are a conditioning factor ourselves. We have an effect on the world, and we're also affected by the world as well. So that's sort of getting into talking about karma, basically. You know, the fact that we are able to influence our conditions around us, that's what we call the law of karma. And this is one of the four reminders. So karma and its consequences is one of the four reminders. So we're definitely the product of certain things that we can't change. Would everybody agree with that? Yeah, so there's certain things that we can't change. There are certain things that are just a given, aren't there, in our existence. So what would some of those things be? Can people think of examples of that? There are certain things, obviously, that we can't change. There are certain things that we don't have control over. So what would some of those things be? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, our genes and the fact that our parents actually made us without asking us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't choose my parents.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Neither of us.
Yeah. That's right. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But anybody else? Yeah, go on.
Death and aging, those are things that you just can't change.
Yeah, so we can't control that, can we? Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
The past.
Yeah, so we can't change the past. That's really, really interesting, isn't it? So no matter how much we would like to, at the moment we can't sort of get in our time machine and go back and change the past. So we have the consequences of the past now. We can't actually change what's happened, and I'll come back to that later. But as you were saying, we can't change. Well, actually, it's interesting. In some Buddhist traditions, they say that you do choose your parents. I'm not really sure about that. I think it's probably easier at the moment just to stick with the idea that actually you're born into a certain situation. You know, maybe you do choose that, I don't know. But the you that you are now certainly hasn't chosen to be born into that situation. So I was thinking about this. I was born in a small town. Well, I was actually born in Bristol, but I grew up in a small town in the north of England. And when I was a teenager, I definitely didn't feel like I chose to be there. You know, I felt sort of quite frustrated and kind of really looking forward to just getting to a city and sort of living a more exciting life. I felt like I hadn't chosen my parents. You know, we can't choose our genes. We can't control, you know, certain organic factors around us. We can't control the weather and things like that. There are, you know, huge sections of, you know, we can't control other people's behaviour a lot of the time. So there are a lot of things that we cannot affect and we cannot have control over. But there are a lot of things that we do have control over. And this is where we get into the whole area of karma, basically. And that rests on this central teaching of the Buddha, which is, so the Buddha taught that he taught this concept of praticca samuppada, which basically means, it also gets referred to as conditioned co-production or dependent origination or dependent arising. And what that means is that things arise dependent on conditions, basically. So everything that comes into being is dependent on certain causes and conditions. And one of those conditions is to do with us, and it's to do with our mind. And that's possible because we have a certain kind of consciousness as a human being. So we have a certain potential as a human being to develop this kind of consciousness that we have. And that is that we're not only aware, but we're also aware that we are aware, if that makes sense. So we know what's going on around us, but we're also aware of the fact that we know what's going on around us. So we can observe our own mind, basically. When you actually start to think about that, it's kind of weird. Like, you start tying your own mind up in knots a little bit. It's a very strange thing to consider. You know, it's almost like the eye looking at itself or something. But Kuslasara was leading this meditation in the first half. She was leading the mindfulness of breathing. And meditation is only possible because we have that kind of consciousness as human beings. So I remember once seeing a bumper sticker on a car that said, if you can breathe, you can meditate. And I thought, actually, that's not true, because hamsters can breathe, but I don't think hamsters can meditate. It's not only hamsters, by the way, you know, lots of other animals as well. But you need to have this reflexive kind of consciousness. So you need to be able to breathe, yes, if you're meditating on the breath. But what's key to meditation and mindfulness is that you have this self-reflexive consciousness, basically. You have this capacity to be aware of your own mind, which also means, and this is crucial, it also means that you can be aware of the effect that you're having in the world. So you can see what you're doing, and you can observe what you're doing, and you can observe, to an extent, the effect that you're having in the world. And karma, it means something like willed action. So karma means something like action, and it's like willed action. So the intention behind what you do is key. And because we have this awareness of awareness, that is possible. So it's cause and effect, but it's also an awareness of cause and effect. So we know that actions have consequences. Well, do we know that actions have consequences? I don't know. We need to become more and more aware of that. And the more we become aware of that, the more we can work on this level of karma, and the more we can become aware of, the more we can develop that factor of awareness becoming aware of itself. And this applies to, so when I say that actions have consequences and there's a cause and effect, this applies to body, speech and mind in the Buddhist tradition. So that's quite an interesting thing to take on board. So it's action, all actions have consequences, but from the perspective of us as human beings, everything that we do with in terms of body, speech and mind has an effect. So that means everything, not just that we do with our bodies, and not just everything that we say, but even everything that we think. So let's just let that drop for a moment. That's quite a thing to think about. So what we do with our mind is significant in terms of the fact that that actually has consequences as well. So it will have consequences for us, and it will have consequences for the people around us as well. So this is why mindfulness is really, really important. Because when we practice mindfulness, and when we practice the mindfulness of breathing, so I was just having a conversation with Kuslasara this afternoon. We were talking about the class this evening, and we were talking about the mindfulness of breathing, because she was going to teach the mindfulness of breathing tonight. And it's a very, very subtle practice, the mindfulness of breathing. You know, you're watching your breath, and you're becoming aware of your breath and the bodily sensations around it, and you're watching what's going on in your mind. And lots of people sort of do that, you know, they take on this practice and they think, okay, well, sort of what's the big deal, in a sense. But when you practice that technique and that practice over years and years and years, I mean, I think it can have a profound effect almost right from the start. It did with me. But when you practice that meditation over years, it has a really transformative effect on you. So we were chatting this afternoon, and I was saying that one of the things that I've really noticed with this practice is that it develops that capacity of self-reflexive awareness that you have. So you become more aware of when you're going to speak, for example. There's a subtle moment that before you speak, you can consider what are the consequences of what you might say. Before you act, you can think about what are the consequences of having this action. And you can just be much, much more aware of the world around you, seeing the way that you're acting, seeing the way that other people are acting. And that subtly refines your consciousness over the years. And this is what happens when we practice meditation and we practice mindfulness. So this is why this is really, really key, that we have this capacity and we can work to develop that through practicing meditation and through practicing mindfulness. So I'll just pause there for a moment and just see if there's any questions or comments, and then I'm going to refer to a great work of literature to illustrate this point.
I think there's an area of philosophy that talk about the study of how do we know what we know. I think it's called epistemology.
Mm-hmm.
And basically our awareness is subject, I think, to a level of perception. And perception is something that has to be worked on, something that has to be honed in on, because, you know, how does a blind person make themselves aware to the different colors, you know, shades? How does someone who is raised in violence be made aware of that is something wrong? You know, so I think perception is closely linked to better awareness.
Yeah, and you're saying that's something that we can work on and we can develop, basically. Yeah, I think that, you know, it's very, very true. That's basically what I'm saying. And not everybody will have that capacity to the same degree. I remember talking with a friend about this years ago, and we were on retreat together, actually, and she was talking about, she was a youth worker, and she worked with very troubled teenagers, and we were talking about people taking responsibility and how spiritual growth comes from taking responsibility for our actions. And she was saying, well, what about the young people that I work with? And we were both sort of reflecting on that a little bit, and I was saying, well, it may not be that people actually are always fully aware of what they're doing, and we can only take responsibility actually if we have that awareness. So it's really, really key that we develop that awareness, and then once you start to have that capacity, you can take responsibility for your actions, you can work on it more and more, and that capacity gets refined. So yeah, I think it's very true what you're saying. So actions have consequences, you know, there's cause and effect, but I mean, this is sort of the good news and the bad news, I think. So the good news is that actions have consequences. The bad news is that actions have consequences. Because what we tend to want is, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, we all want to have an effect in the world. You know, we all want to make a difference. We all want to have some sort of impact in the world around us. But if we're honest with ourselves, most of the time what we want is to be able to sort of turn that off and on. So we'd like to be able to sort of have an effect in some ways, and then maybe turn it off and have a bit of a karma holiday, where we go off and do things that maybe are pleasurable for us, but we don't want to experience you know, certain effects of those things. But it's not just that actions have an effect. It's not only that we can affect things, it's that we can't not affect things. So we cannot not have an effect. So all of you sitting here now are having an effect. You're all having an effect on me. You're all having an effect on each other. And the thoughts that you have in your mind now will be affecting you. Maybe they'll even be affecting the people around us. That's possible as well. But we're all affecting ourselves and everyone else all the time. That's quite a weighty thing to take on board, isn't it? So we can't switch that off. And when we take that on board, and when we reflect on that, I think that's really cause for thinking about how we behave and how we are in the world. So that's quite a thing. But I'd invite you to think about the opposite. So say, for example, if that wasn't the case and we couldn't affect anything, imagine if no matter what we did, we just didn't have an effect and things didn't seem to change. Can you imagine sort of what that would be like? Anyone want to say what they think that might be like for them?
Stagnant.
Say again?
Stagnant.
Stagnant, yeah. So you'd feel stagnant, wouldn't you? Exactly. You wouldn't feel like you were moving on or growing or... Yeah, and how would that feel, do you think? Yeah.
And also, I think there would be no motives for our actions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if we don't know roughly what effect our actions are going to have, then there's no point in acting in certain ways. That's right, yeah. So last week, Kusala Sara, when she gave her talk, it was very strong, I thought, actually. She had a human skull here, and she talked about that sublime work of literature, Hamlet. And I'm going to draw on a work of art that I think is excellent, but not quite as sublime as Hamlet, which is the 1993 film Groundhog Day, starring Bill Murray. Has anybody seen Groundhog Day? Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I really, really like that film. And it's got a particular place in my heart because I was revising for my A-levels when that film came out, and I remember I'd been working quite hard revising, and I took a break to go and see that at the cinema, and really, really enjoyed it. And at the time, I didn't really take on board its kind of spiritual values, but they're definitely there if you look for them. So, Bill Murray plays this really, really grouchy kind of TV anchorman called Phil Connors, and he seems to be stuck in the same day again and again and again. So for those of you that haven't seen the film for a while, like he wakes up every morning at 6:53, I think it is, to hear Sonny and Cher singing "I Got You, Babe," and then the next day exactly the same thing happens, and then the next day and the next day and the next day. I did a bit of a deep dive into this film to sort of referencing it in the talk, and apparently it has been cited by various Buddhist teachers over the years. And one of the things that they've tried to do is to ascertain exactly how long he's actually stuck in this day. Some people think it's as much as 80,000 years. Other people think it's just a few months. I'm not going to go into why they think that. But anyway, he's stuck in this day. And as you said, like, what would be the point, basically, if you can't see that your actions have consequences? So what happens to him is, like, he has this day, like, this old school friend comes up to him called Ned Ryerson at the same time every day, and he goes through a phase of just being really angry that he's stuck in this day. So he punches Ned Ryerson, and then he just goes out and gets, really, really drunk, and then he goes through that phase. And then eventually he starts, sort of becoming a bit more philosophical, and he starts taking up like piano lessons, and he becomes like a sort of concert pianist level piano player and a kind of an ice sculptor. And he goes through all these various phases basically in the film. But it's only when he becomes a different person that he wakes up and the day is different, basically. And I think that's kind of the crux of the film, really. So unfortunately, because it's Hollywood, this happens when he falls in love with Andie MacDowell. So he has this superficial attraction to the character, I can't remember what her name is, played by Andie MacDowell. And he starts off just trying to sort of like win her affection. But then as time goes on, he really realizes that he's been this really grouchy, grumpy old person, and he genuinely becomes quite different and quite, very affectionate and very kind to people. And that's how he sort of escapes from being trapped in this day, basically. So I think it's quite interesting to consider that. Like, what would it be like? Sometimes the weight of karma can be quite a thing to think about. But what would it be like if that wasn't the case? And our days and our existences were just like the same all the time, or we acted in certain ways but we couldn't see the results of those consequences. I had a dream a few years ago. I was on retreat, and I had this dream where I was at a party, and I went into this party, and it was a kind of a big village hall, and it was full of lots of my friends, and they were playing "I Want to Dance with Somebody" by Whitney Houston. I don't know why, I'm not a particularly big Whitney Houston fan, but anyway, they were playing this song, you know, and it was like kind of started, and I was really overjoyed to like hear this pop song, and I thought, oh, you know, this is fantastic. Yeah, I want to dance with somebody. And then at the end of the song, the DJ put it on again. And it was like, oh, right, okay. Yeah, okay, I want to dance with somebody. Like, and this went on and on and on. And by the end of it, I was just like, oh my God, I can't listen to this record anymore. And I was just imagining what it would be like if you were stuck in this village hall where you were permanently listening to like Whitney Houston on a loop. Not quite sure why I brought that in, but I think it's just this thing again of like, you know, just imagining being stuck in that loop and not actually being able to have an effect and not being able to change ourselves and change our lives. But we can actually do that. So sometimes this doesn't suit us, does it? So we don't actually want to become aware of our actions, and we don't actually want to become aware that what we're doing has an effect. You know, we need to do that in order to grow and in order to take responsibility for our actions and to change. You know, that's, I mean, in a way that is spiritual growth, is, you know, becoming aware of what we're doing, noticing our actions, modifying our actions, and then noticing the effect that that has, and then that becomes a positive, or, you know, it could be a negative spiral if it's the other way around. And that doesn't suit us because sometimes it's quite painful to come into relationship with our actions. So, like recently, for example, I've been just reflecting on some of my earlier life, and I think because I've been practicing meditation and Buddhism now for a long time, I don't know, sometimes things come up from my earlier life, and there was a long time in my life where, for example, I spent many, many years drinking and taking a lot of drugs. And at the time, I felt like that was actually fairly sort of ethically neutral. I had a kind of a wrong view on that, basically, that I thought, oh, well, that's basically harmless. Really what I'm doing is mostly there just kind of harming myself or giving myself a few hangovers and so on. And recently, actually, I've been realizing that I probably did cause quite a lot of harm to myself and possibly the people around me. And certainly what I did at that time was kind of put a bit of a ceiling on my own potential. So I may not have overtly caused harm to people, but I sort of stunted my own growth basically by doing that for a really long time. And this was quite some time ago, but it's been coming into my mind recently. And we need to become aware, even if it's not necessarily sort of all that pleasant. So I've been reading a book recently, which is... it's a very interesting book. It's called The Devil You Know, and it's about a forensic psychiatrist who does therapy with people who've committed quite heinous acts, basically. So she works in Broadmoor and other places, and I was quite interested in this because I was ordained with someone who worked as a forensic psychiatrist in Broadmoor, and we used to have conversations about the work that he did. And in this book, it's quite interesting. What you see is that even when people have done really, really, really horrendous things, there is always the capacity for change in them, but they can only change if they really come into relationship with what they've done and they really face up to the consequences of what they've done. And sometimes what they've done is so painful that they actually don't even remember it, so they've actually screened it out of their memory. So there's this one story, this is quite strong, so I hope it's okay for me to talk about this, but I will talk about it. There's this one story where she's talking to this guy he'd murdered 3 people, basically, or he thought he'd murdered 3 people. And then in the course of their therapy sessions, he started mentioning somebody else. And he almost didn't realise that he was doing it. And she had to say to him, okay, do you realise that you've mentioned this other person? And it turned out that he'd killed somebody that he didn't even remember killing. So he was obviously so traumatized by doing this that he'd screened this out of his memory. And in the process of therapy, he'd start to open up, and this had come back into his consciousness. And he was able then to sort of admit this, really, and sort of open up to the fact that that had happened, and sort of take responsibility for that, really, and face the consequences of his actions. And that's a really, really extreme example of this. But I thought it was very, very interesting because over the course of that, even though he'd done these really horrendous things, he was able to face fully up to that and seemingly make quite a lot of progress and become, well, in the eyes of this therapist, he became a very, very different person through the course of doing that. Okay. So maybe I'll just pause there again for a moment before I carry on and see if there are any questions or anything like that. Yeah, it's Nadia, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, Nadia.
Yeah. I was just going to sort of corroborate and reflect back on what you were saying about it's also, it may be frustrating on some aspects to not have an effect. But equally, I was thinking about the Serum Everard case where this person seemed to not understand, or on some level, from the videos I've seen, not understand the impact it must have had on her family and friends and just around the world of doing what he did. And I just thought it's almost like it enabled him to have some level of indulgence in his actions. And it's that thing that you were saying, your thoughts have an impact. And he clearly created such a construct in his head. And that somehow it wouldn't have an effect that he did what he did. I don't know if you had anything more to say about something about maybe some. It's just interesting thinking that back to therapy and something about exposing those thoughts.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It makes me think of the value of talking about our thought processes and actually making that conscious with other people. You know, particularly people that we trust. So actually talking about really just being genuine about what our experience, I think, is. You know, like what you're talking about is almost like somebody hiding something away, isn't it? And that's sort of festering, and somebody not then really taking responsibility for what their thought process is. And this is the thing about actions of body, speech and mind, is that our actions of mind, they have an effect on us in the moment. So for example, you know, we've probably all had the experience of being very stressed or, you know, ruminating, and that has an effect on our body. But it also has a cumulative effect over time. And our thoughts lead us then to say things or to commit physical actions or to do things with our body as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So
making that conscious, I think, is really, really key. It's a key part of awareness, really, is that, you know, if we're able to consciously examine our own thoughts, that's one thing, and then also if we're able to make those conscious and to talk about other people with, you know, what's going on in our mind, for example. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. So we've gone down a bit of a dark path there, haven't we? Talking about some quite difficult things. But I think the key thing about this is just to think about the fact that, you know, actions have consequences. It's actions of our body, speech and mind have consequences, and we're agents of that, so we can do something about that. We can direct that, basically. And the other thing that comes to mind as well, just as I'm speaking, I hadn't meant to talk about this, but it's also when we become aware, we also become aware of the conditions that support kind of skillful or helpful or positive action as well. That's another part of awareness. So Kuslasara was talking about going on retreat, for example, at the break. You know, those would be like, going on retreat is an extremely sort of karmically positive action because you're choosing to put yourself in conditions that you know will help you develop and will help you grow and will help you become more aware. So being aware of the conditions around us as well is a key part of that awareness. So I just want to say a little bit about what karma doesn't mean. So sometimes there can be misunderstandings around what karma means or what it's actually referring to. So it doesn't mean fate, for example. It doesn't mean that something is predestined. You know, that kind of goes against the teaching of the Buddha. Sometimes the word karma and fate gets used a bit interchangeably, doesn't it? So people might say, oh, that's his karma or that's her karma, meaning that that's their fate. I have lots of conversations with my mum about this because she believes that you don't actually have free will and that your fate is sort of already written somewhere. I don't know where it's written and who sort of has control over that, but that's what she believes, and I disagree with that, and that's not a Buddhist perspective. So from a Buddhist perspective, there isn't fate and there isn't sort of predestination. So that's not what karma means. It also doesn't mean that everything that happens to you is a result of your karma. So this is something else that people often think, which, there's often a very overly literal reading of karma, which is like, I don't know, you're walking down the street and a piano falls on your head, and it's because you were a really nasty piano teacher in a former life or something like that. It doesn't mean something like that. You can't literally, it's often not as straightforwardly reciprocal as that. And it doesn't mean that everything that happens to you is as a result of karma. It may be, it may be that certain things that you do have karmic consequences, and what you're experiencing may be the result of that. But it's usually a mixture of lots and lots of different conditions. And as we were saying earlier, there are lots of conditions that you don't have control over. So traditionally, in the tradition, they talk about organic and inorganic matter also has its own laws. So the laws of biology and the laws of physics. There's the laws of basic psychology. So things like instinct also have a sort of a play on the effects that we have as well. And karma is just one strand of that, basically. So us choosing to direct our mind and the actions that come as consequences of that is karma. But it doesn't mean then that everything that happens to you is a result of your karma. And we also can't know. That's the other thing. So the Buddha talked about, there's a sutta where he talks about what are called the Four Unconjecturables, which are basically the four things that are not worth talking about because you'll never get to the bottom of them. And one of them is karma. So he says that you can never fully see the effects of your actions, and you can never say that the effect of someone else's actions are their karma. You can't ever be sure of that, basically. It may be, but you don't know. So there's a lot that we don't know, but what we do know is that broadly speaking, if we behave in ways, if we behave with positive intentions and we behave in a way that is intended to bring about positive action, then we can know that broadly speaking that will have positive karmic consequences. And I think we can rest in that really, and we can act from that place. So traditionally, it talks about three different types of karma. We talk about habitual karma, death proximate karma, and weighty karma. So what do you think habitual karma might be?
Maybe karma that's caused by your habits, your addiction, things like that.
Yeah, that's right. So it's basically the things that we do over time will have, they'll have consequences in the moment as well, but particularly if we build up a habit around something, that will have either, depending on what it is, it will either have, positive or negative effects over time. So it will be things like, for example, having a regular meditation practice will be a really, really positive habitual karma. If we have certain addictions like, drinking or smoking, that would be a really negative karmic consequence over time. And the reason for that is that when we do something habitually, it conditions our mind and it conditions our mental habits. We sort of create grooves in the mind, don't we? So that then the next time we go to do that, we fall into that much more easily. And that can be true sort of positively or negatively, which is, that's the power of habits, basically, isn't it? is that the more that we do something, the more we become inclined to do it. And then there's weighty karma. So weighty karma means it's something that you do, and it has a particularly sort of heavy karmic consequence. So can anybody think of what an example of that might be?
Murder.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be a weighty karma, is if you kill somebody. And it's particularly weighty karma apparently if you murder a Buddha or somebody who's enlightened. So don't do that. So that's an extremely sort of karmically very weighty. Apparently, killing your parents is also a very, very weighty karma. So that's on the negative side. And then on the positive side, another weighty karma is said to be attaining higher states of consciousness in meditation. So if you get into what we call dhyana, which are higher states of meditation, higher states of consciousness in meditation, apparently that's a very, very weighty karma. I don't know if this is traditional, but when I was on my ordination course, so I did a 4-month retreat, in the middle of which I was ordained into the Triratna Buddhist order. And the person who was leading our course said apparently making a commitment to a spiritual life, so ordination, for example, is also a very, very weighty karma. And when I think about it, I was thinking, like, in a way, there's probably a link between weighty karma and habitual karma. So in the case of meditation, and in the case of, say, something like ordination, it's weighty because it then has an effect on your habitual karma. So it conditions how you are going forwards, and I think that's true of any weighty karma, really. And then there's death proximate karma, which is the karma of the state of mind that you are in on your deathbed, which apparently has a very, very weighty impact on on future rebirth, basically. So that's the karma of the state of mind that you have when you're on your deathbed, which is quite interesting to think about, isn't it? I mean, I think with that as well, we can only really spend our lives preparing for that. And I think if we think about that in terms of habitual karma, that will then have an effect on sort of death proximate karma. Okay, so I think to summarize, in these 4 reminders, we talk about the preciousness of human birth, and we talk about death and mortality, and in the verses that Kuslasara read, it says this human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. That's only possible because of conditioned co-production. It's only possible because of karma, basically. It's a precious opportunity because we can work with our minds and we can shape our minds and we can develop this capacity of awareness that we have. And that's an extremely creative capacity that we have. So you could, in a sense, say that that's the most creative thing that we can do, is to work on our minds. Because through working on our minds, we can become, the possibilities are infinite, the possibilities are endless. So we have this beautiful Buddha figure here on the shrine. And the Buddha didn't actually look like that. We know that. And this is a sort of a poetic rendering of what the Buddha looked like. But actually what that is a poetic evocation of the enlightenment experience. So through working on our minds, we can attain sort of more and more and more skillful and positive mental states where we're being kinder, we're able to be more creative, we're able to be more aware, and the possibilities for that are endless. So our potential as human beings is infinite, and it's the law of karma that makes that possible. And then when we work on the law of karma, we work on that level, we're able to work with these processes that are at play in the universe. And at a certain point, then something else takes over. And it's almost like then we're in the sort of gravitational pull towards enlightenment. And then there are different processes at play that we call Dharma processes. And I've been talking about karma processes. So if we could live by that, if we could reflect on these teachings and really let that sink in, I think that would have an effect on our lives. And I think it's important to think about, well, what does this actually mean? Why would we reflect on these 4 reflections that we're thinking about? Like, why would we actually do that? And it's because by reflecting on these teachings, then we actually become more aware of what it is that we're actually doing. So we're not just sort of stumbling through life. We're actually trying to make something of our consciousness and trying to develop our consciousness. But what can we actually do? How can we actually do that? Well, we can reflect on these teachings, for example. So just reading these teachings, reading the mind turnings, reflecting on these teachings, really reflecting on whether they are actually true for us or not, and really trying to see the truth in those and see what that is in our lived experience is extremely positive, because that will make us behave differently. And meditating. So, we were meditating at the start of the class this evening. We're meditating because that cultivates this faculty of awareness. It's a way to work directly on our minds. There are lots of ways to work indirectly on our minds, but in meditation we're working directly on our mind. We're seeing what our mind is doing and we're directing it in a certain way. And that makes us want to behave differently. So it will make us want to behave with more consideration, with kindness and so on. And I think the takeaway from this really, like I was just reflecting on this today, is when we do that, we can have a massive effect on the world. Each of us can have a huge effect on our surroundings and the people that we come into contact with. I was just I was speaking at a conference today. So for my work, I work for a charity that funds work with extremely disadvantaged, marginalised communities in India and Nepal and Bangladesh. And I was talking at a conference today about educating girls from extremely poor backgrounds in India. And I was talking about a project that I work very, very closely with. And I was talking about this woman that founded the project there, who's the director of this organisation called Nishta. And she's just had a huge effect on thousands and thousands and thousands of people in her life by taking certain actions in her life and dedicating her life to working with these extremely marginalised communities. And she's had a massive effect on the world that she lives in and all these people that she comes into contact with. She's had a huge effect on me as well. I find her extremely inspirational. And there are people like that. And when I think about the founder of our order, Sangharakshita, the amount of people that he has affected in his life, hundreds of thousands of people. And if we direct our minds in the right way, we can, become more and more and more kind of skillful and creative, that we can have a huge effect on the world around us. I think we tend to underestimate the effect that we have. And I think karma's a little bit like that. I think we tend to underestimate the effect of both our positive and our negative actions. I think often when we behave, with a lack of awareness, or we behave, what we would call as Buddhists unskillfully, I think we tend to underestimate the harm that does. But I also think we tend to underestimate the good that does as well. I was very moved when I was listening to Kuslasara's talk, that she was talking about, was it you said you felt like you were sitting in a graveyard or something, because we were talking about these stupas behind us. So I don't know if you can see behind me. There are these things that we call stupas here, and they contain people's ashes. And the one just behind me here, this really beautifully painted one, has the ashes of a woman called Vidya Jyoti. I was very moved hearing Kuslasara talking about that, because the woman whose ashes were in there was a friend of mine. And she died when she was 71 years old. And she was an extremely irreverent, kind of playful woman. And I was with her when she died. And that was a very, very strong experience for me. And she had a very, very strong effect on my life. And I just thought it was lovely hearing Kuslasara talk about that. And just thinking about how people affect us and the potential for that, really. I think in a way she led, not a sort of an extraordinary life, but she really affected the people that she came into contact with, and had a very positive effect on them, myself included in that. Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes left if there are any questions, and then maybe we'll just pause and we can just sit quietly for a couple of minutes at the end. Yes, Nadia, yeah.
I'm trying to find a way to articulate this. So, I think, obviously we know like with some communities, like I think about, like for example, like we know well, in this country, if you're someone who's black, you're 4 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on a mental health week,
Okay.
so it's something that's come to mind. So I'd say there are some communities or some groups who tend to experience things that are probably a bit more unfortunate, I would say. I suppose you wouldn't call that karma, would you?
No.
So it's just, is that just conditions?
Yeah, so it's conditions. So it may be karma, but I think you're on very, very shaky ground. This is what I was saying before when I said about that not everything that happens to you is a result of your karma. I mean, it makes me, that's a very, very good example, and it makes me think of those communities that I work with in India who are born into a particular social strata, born into the lowest rung of the caste system. You cannot say that that's as a result of people's karma. And I think it's very dangerous and very unhelpful to do that. So, where you're born may be something to do with karma, but it will be all sorts of other conditions that come into play as well, and where you are in your life, the things that you experience in your life. And that's why I was very, very keen to say that we cannot say what is karma for somebody else and what isn't. Generally you can look at somebody and think, well, because they're doing this certain thing habitually, that may be having an effect on them. But it's in terms of ourselves and other people, we can't be that precise about it. And the Buddha was very clear about that.
And is that sort of conditioning, would you say that's someone's Mara, for example?
When you say it's someone's Mara,
yeah.
What do you mean?
I was just reading a book about Mara, sort of how Mara sometimes tends to be reduced to a psychological function, but actually Mara is something that's more than just sort of ill thoughts or sort of the patterns of your mind. It's a personality or persona in its own right.
Yeah.
I suppose what I'm really trying to get at from that was how do you work in those conditions?
Yeah.
The sort of conditions that we just spoke about.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I suppose that's the thing with what we're talking about is you can't say that that's somebody's karma, and you can't choose necessarily the situation that you're born into. You may not necessarily choose a lot of the circumstances that you're in, but you can. The more you become aware, you can choose a creative response to those conditions. So even when those conditions may be unpleasant, the more we become aware, we can start to choose what our response is to what happens to us in life. And that's where karma comes in, basically, is that the more we're able to develop that capacity, we can start to choose how we respond, basically. And that's sort of the key to it, really. So we can't, it's like we said at the start of the evening, there are certain things that we can't choose about our lives, but the more we become aware, the more we build that sort of kind of creative capacity that we have, then we can respond to something. And I wouldn't say the Buddhist tradition, the world is full of people responding extremely creatively and positively to often very, very adverse conditions. So it makes me think of a couple of years ago I read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That even in those horrendous conditions of being in a concentration camp, obviously, being in that situation is extremely difficult and challenging, and yet somehow he found a creative response to that. I think we need to start finishing up, actually, unfortunately. So we're just coming up to time. So I will be outside if we could have a chat for your question. But yeah, we're just coming up to 1:45. So I was going to finish with a mantra. So yeah, let's do that. Actually, we'll just finish. We'll chant the Shakyamuni mantra just for a couple of minutes. And it's very good just to finish the evening ritually, I think, even if it's just with a short period of chanting the mantra. So I'll start that off, and then you can join in, and then we'll let that die down after a couple of minutes. Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha. 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 Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Good to be with you all tonight, and have a good week. And yeah, we'll see you all next week. When I think, is it Pranyamanas? Are you teaching next week on the on defects of samsara? Yeah, so come back next week, and yeah, hopefully see somebody next week.